of the John Adams Institute. Unfortunately, Rosa Shorto could not make it tonight. We are very honored to have Mr. Saïd Sayrafiezadeh, as what he pronounces himself a bit different. It's Saïd Sayrafiezadeh here tonight to talk about his book and read a part from his book, When Skateboards Will Be Free, which is an extraordinary life story so far, I can say. Interviewing and giving a proper introduction to Mr. Sayrafiezadeh is Bahram Sadeghi. He's a journalist, he's a TV producer, TV host. He also writes articles for, amongst others, Hollands Diep. And he organizes debate for the Bali. Please welcome Bahram Sadeghi.
Goedenavond allemaal. Good evening. My name is Bahram Sadeghi, and for some of you probably it comes as a surprise or maybe as a shock, but English is not my native language. So I know I speak English very well, so in advance I would like to apologize for the mistakes not planning, but I definitely will make. Having said that, a wise person said once that all great works of art, whether it's a movie or a book or play, they are all about generational conflicts. And, you know, the famous father-son, especially, and father-daughter relationship. And my grandmother said that if you can combine that generational conflict with political or social context, then you get very great work of art. And it goes definitely for this book. And for the writer, I'm going to interview within probably 26 minutes, 27 minutes. Because tonight, after my very brief introduction, Saïd, as I pronounce his name, Sayrafiezadeh, will come here and he will read parts of his book and talk about the background. And then we will have a short, I wouldn't say interview, but maybe a conversation about 45 minutes. And I hope that if you have any questions, just address the questions here. And I try to make eye contact with you, so raise your hand. I will try to remember your face, your hand, and hopefully give you some space to ask your questions. And when I told my friends that I'm going to interview an half Iranian, half American young man, they said, "Wow, what very interesting." But then I said, "That's not all. He's also half Jewish." And they said, "Oh, very interesting." But he said, "That's not all. It's more complicated. I don't know. I don't want to problematize that." And then I said, he's half Iranian, half American, Jewish. But the most probably, in my humble opinion, the most important part of his book is that both parents were communist, socialist in the United States. And they said, "Oh, that's very interesting and also very interesting, and we wish you good luck." And I read the book. And it's very, very, in a way, in a nice way, it's a very painful book to read, because even I'm not half Iranian, neither Jewish or brought up in socialist environment. You recognize everything because he has a very sharp eye for things happening around him. And he even has the ability to tell you how other people see them as a poor, different, small family. And no, the only reason I didn't cry during during reading the book was because probably I don't have a heart, because I'm sure if you read the book, it's so small, fragile, and you see everything is going back and forth in time, and you see this small child in United States that everything that happens all over the world has some influence on him. When there is when the Iranian students, they hostage the embassy in Tehran, that affects him. When there is a hostaging of the Italian cruise ship, Aquilo Lauro, thank you very much. Then it's affecting him too. Everything the Operation Desert Fox under Clinton, it's affecting him and his people around him. So it's you get, it's very, in a way, very multi-layered book. And one of probably the only good question I have for the interview time is that which layer, in his opinion, in the opinion of the writer, is the most important layer? Because I can tell you, it's multi-layered. You can enjoy a book on a sentimental way. You can enjoy the book on a political way, and you can read it on a very old-fashioned, personal way. It's a young man who is telling you about his time in the last 30, 35 years. And with that, I would like to would you like to ask you to give a big applause for Saïd Sayrafiezadeh. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bahram, for that nice intro. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Before I get started, I want to thank the John Adams Institute for having me, Russell Shorter and Martin Van Essen, and for my publisher Meulenhoff, Peter Claessens, and Mariana and Milou for bringing me here. And when I was thinking about people to thank, I thought I should thank my mom and dad for a bad childhood, because that got me a great trip to Amsterdam. And I love coming to Amsterdam, and I don't know, it always breaks my heart when I have to leave. It's a beautiful city. So I've turned I got something out of the bad childhood. One of the things you left out, Bahram, was I'm Saïd Sayrafiezadeh, Iranian, but my father, Mahmoud Sayrafiezadeh, who was born in Iran, left me when I was 9 months old. And a big part of what the book is about is growing up with a single Jewish mother and not knowing my father. And in researching the book, I did some family tree stuff. And my mother, who is Martha Harris, her maiden name, when she was born Martha Finkelstein, changed her name to Harris around 1945, right around World War II. And in the machinations of my mind, I sometimes think, what if my mother had been my father, and then I would be Finkelstein just as easily? And what if I was named after my great uncle, Saïd Salmasi? What if my mother happened to name me after her great uncle, who was Julius? I would be Julius Finkelstein. I'm equally Julius Finkelstein standing here in front of you as much as I am Saïd Sayrafiezadeh. So whatever that means, that's something that goes through my head in thinking about identity, ethnic identity. I'm always curious when I do any reading, who here has ever passed the Socialist Workers Party on a street corner? 5. In the United States or outside? That's a great question. Well, I'm talking about the United States. Does that change the hands that went up? No. No, it's still the 5 or 6 people who have passed? Okay. And out of you 5 or 6, who has stopped to buy the militant? Oh, there's always one person, always at least one person. There's only been one time where there was not one person in the audience, and that's when I did a reading in Hilton Head, South Carolina. For those of you who don't know, is a golf community, retirement community. My in-laws, who brought me there to do a reading, they were school teachers, and nobody had bought the militant. Anybody buy a subscription? Did you buy a subscription to the militant? No, you just bought one single issue. Okay. What's that? More than one issue, but you never bought a subscription. Okay. I would have loved you as a child, hanging around the table where my mom would be selling the militant. And frankly, I would have hated the rest of you. And I think this is sort of where the beginning of my alienation starts, with seeing you ignorant masses who don't know the truth or don't want to know the truth passing by the Socialist Workers Party table, and except for this one lovely woman here who paid whatever it was at the time, 75 cents or for the issue. And that's a weird thing for a child to get into their head, because one of the things was, as a child, I thought I was confused about numbers. I mean, I could see people are not flocking to the Socialist Workers Party, but somehow I thought there were millions of members. Somehow I thought we were a huge organization, and it was only until I became an adult where I started to realize not that many people knew about us, and we're not really in the history books, but we claim to have done lots and lots of things and to be very, very important, and we're going to be the ones who are leading the workers' revolution when it happens. And that sets us apart from the other socialist parties. When you talk about, I was just talking to Martin about socialist parties in Holland, we're not talking about running for parliament. We're talking about the workers in the factories and the farms rising up. And even as I'm speaking, I can hear the old speeches that I listen to. I'm almost have the same tone of voice. Rising up, taking power, hanging the capitalists from the lampposts. That's our kind of socialism. That's our revolution. That's the Bolshevik revolution. So just to give you a sense of what my fantasies as a child were like. The passage I'm going to read, Bahram, when he was talking, he said it very well. He said how the big things in the world affected me. And he mentioned the Iranian hostage crisis and Achille Lauro. And one of the things he left out, which in some ways is the beginning of my inculcation into socialist politics, into the Socialist Workers Party, was the 1973 grape and iceberg lettuce boycott. Are people here familiar with that boycott? Some people probably too young, obviously, for that. Lasted about 5 years. And it was a boycott that began in the fields of California. Cesar Chavez called for a national boycott of table grapes and iceberg lettuce. And from the moment he called that boycott, I was not permitted to eat those things. And we will see what the ramifications of that are. When I was 4 years old, there arose one morning an unresolvable crisis between my mother and me. I was in my bedroom playing with my toys when she entered and knelt beside me on the floor. "We will not be eating grapes or lettuce anymore," she said plainly. I put my toys down and looked up into her face. It seemed odd and outlandish, this sudden rule, the kind of rule that comes from nowhere, out of nowhere, made solely at the whim of the adult world. That's a dumb rule, I said. It's not a dumb rule, she said, and she went on to patiently explain that the rule was not her own, but the rule of the Socialist Workers Party, which was itself following the rule of César Chavez and the United Farm Workers, who had called for a national boycott of table grapes and iceberg lettuce. All of this she described in the simplest of terms that allowed me to understand and accept the edict. "You're such a good boy," she said, and she kissed me on the top of my head. As the days passed, however, and the boycott carried on, I found that my desire for grapes began to eclipse my compassion for the workers. Now it was my turn to interrupt my mother one morning. "I'm ready to eat grapes," I said. I said it as plainly as she had. She closed the book she was reading and looked down at me. "You can't eat grapes," she said. "You know that." And then she added, "And you can't eat iceberg lettuce." "I don't want to eat iceberg lettuce," I responded brightly, thinking that she would see this as a welcome compromise. "Well, you can't eat that either," she said with measure, adult with child, adult instructing child. I detected, though, somewhere beneath her rational exterior, an undercurrent of satisfaction. "I want to eat grapes," I said. "You can't eat grapes," she said. And then I screamed, "I want to eat grapes! I want to eat grapes!" And I melted to the floor, rolling onto my back. "I want to eat grapes! I want to eat grapes!" "Well, you can't eat grapes," the light and airy voice said. "And you can't eat iceberg lettuce." From there on, the absence of grapes became a constant, unyielding presence in my life. It seemed I was never far from a political poster about not eating grapes, or a leaflet, or a t-shirt, or a conversation, or a forum. I descended into a state of perpetual yearning that intertwined so tightly with my desire that it soon became impossible to distinguish one from the other, and that established a terrible equation for me. Desire equals yearning. All of this culminated in the button my mother made me pin to my jacket, which featured the logo of the United Farm Workers, a black eagle with wings spread wide against a blood-red background, along with the unequivocal imperative, "Don't eat grapes." I interpreted this not so much as an entreaty to the outside world, as a scarlet letter to remind me of my own sinful desire, which, if I ever quenched, would be through the immiseration of others. "Is the boycott over yet?" I'd ask my mother. "Not yet," she'd say. "When will the boycott be over?" "When the capitalists give the workers their rights." "When will that happen?" "I don't know." "When it happens, will we eat grapes?" "Yes." Weeks passed. "Is the boycott over?" "No." Months passed. "Is the boycott over?" "No." Fall came, then winter. Grapes were no longer in season. "Is the boycott over?" I had become that fox I had learned about in Aesop's fable, who jumped again and again without success at the bunch of grapes dangling on the branch above him. The story that the fox concocts in order to soothe himself and allay his disappointment is that the grapes themselves are most likely sour and not, in the end, worth his trouble. The conclusion I drew, however, was of a different nature. I began to see what my mother saw. The flaw was inside me. Desire under capitalism, all desire, was a shameful, unwanted condition, and one should never attempt to satisfy that desire, but instead, through heightened consciousness of the world, transcend it, and by so doing, rid oneself of it forever. 3 blocks from our apartment in Brooklyn, was the supermarket in which my mother and I would do our weekly shopping. This occasion presented a predicament for the two of us. Not only was I in close proximity to great mountains of grapes, but I was also keenly aware that my neighbors, many of them black, most of them poor, would effortlessly and without any apparent compunction load up their shopping carts with the fruit. "Look, Ma," I'd say, "it's okay for us to eat grapes." "No, it's not." And once we had completed our shopping, I would have to stand beside her in front of the supermarket while she unzipped her knapsack and handed out an endless supply of leaflets with the black eagle, the red background, the 3 simple words. Then one day, after untold months of my ceaseless and unending demand, we were standing in the middle of the produce aisle when she said to me with obvious exasperation, "Eat 1 grape." I could not believe my good fortune. Immediately, I reached my hand up toward the piles towering above me, and I plucked without choosing. The grape was heavier than I remembered grapes to be. I popped it into my mouth and bit down. Fluid squirted into my cheeks. I chewed happily, violating the farm workers without remorse. Then 3 things occurred all at once. The first was that I realized how delicious the grape was, vindication of all the effort I had expended on obtaining it. The second was that I resolved this would not be the last time I was ever permitted to eat a grape. Finally, and most essential, I understood that the simple act of eating instantly rewrote the formula between desire and yearning, creating a new equation. Desire plus yearning equals theft. What was paramount for my mother, though, was that I had not breached the sanctity of the boycott. If anything, the supermarket took a loss on their investment, and therefore, in an indirect way, thievery actually strengthened the struggle of the farm workers. Desire plus yearning plus theft equals revolution. The next time we were in the grocery store, my mother, now unable to turn back from the course of her decision, again allowed me to have a grape. The next time, I ate without permission. "I'm just having 1, Ma," but I had 2. After that, I ate 3, so on and so forth. It became so habitual that I would stand leisurely in front of the mounds of grapes as if they were a buffet, and I was considering my options. I would pluck casually as my mother shopped elsewhere in the store, my button informing the world to do the opposite of what I was doing. One afternoon, in the midst of my revelry, with my mouth full and my hand reaching, I had the uncomfortable sensation that I was being observed. Not too far away, an elderly white woman was staring at me intently. I resented her interference in what I had come to think of as a private moment, and I stopped chewing. "Go ahead," she said sweetly. "Go ahead and eat another one." I wanted to follow her suggestion, but there was something in her voice that made me hesitate. Were her words really words of encouragement? I sensed that I was in danger of being entrapped by the indecipherable language of adult sarcasm. I peered at the woman, who in turn peered at me. She had snow-white hair and leaned heavily on a cane and did not appear to have an unkind face. Perhaps she supported the boycott and therefore saw me as an ally championing the rights of migrant workers. It struck me suddenly how peculiar it was that an adult would actually endorse thievery, and I somehow sensed that I was following a peculiar set of rules. They were, of course, the correct rules, but they had set me in opposition to the rest of the world, where my right was everyone else's wrong, and where my wrong was everyone else's right, and where I would be helpless in ever being able to distinguish for myself which one was which. So I'm going to end there. That's not the end of the chapter. That's not the end of the grape conflict. It goes on, but I'll leave it there for now, and I hope that gives a good sense of the Socialist Workers Party inculcation of a then 4-year-old. And the book follows that trajectory all the way up until today. So I guess we'll sit down and we'll talk. And
would you like to have some water or wine or beer, Heineken? Yeah?
water.
Water would be good, okay. Could force back, yeah, I guess someone is getting it, yeah. The grape stuff. When skateboards will be free,
Yes.
would you please tell me or tell us something about the origin of the title?
The origin
Why?
of the title.
Yeah.
When I was 8 years old, I asked my mother to buy me a skateboard because they were extremely popular at the time. And she took me to Sears department store where they had a huge bin of them. And I said, I want the green one. And she said, well, we can't afford it. It was $10.99. She said, we can't afford it. But when the revolution comes, everyone will have a skateboard because all skateboards will be free. And there you have it.
And did you ask her when the revolution will come?
Yeah,
And like the
that's
grapes,
right.
yeah?
That's right. And then
Yeah.
and as a child, I would often ask her I would say, so am I going to be? See, this is the thing you have to remember, that felt imminent. It really felt imminent. And I would say, so am I going to be 7 when the revolution? And she'd say, no, it's going to take a little bit longer. Will I be 10? No, a little bit longer. Thank you. And then we'd play this game until I got up to age 18. Will I be 18 when and she would say, yes, when you're 18, the revolution will come. Thank you.
I believe, yeah.
That's also come and gone too
Yeah.
for me. So.
Just tell us something about your family. You have a brother and sister. How old are they?
Yeah.
Names? And
I'm the youngest of 3.
Yeah.
One of the aspects of my family is that my father left when I was 9 months old and left my mom with 3 children.
It was 40 years ago, yeah? You are 41 now or 40?
Yeah.
You are 40, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
please go, yeah.
Yeah, so 1969.
Yeah.
I guess within the next 4 or 5 years, when I was about 5 years old, my brother and sister had been sent off to live with my dad. So beginning with about the age of, I would say 5, it's confusing because there's a lot of back and forth, or 5 or 6, it was essentially just my mother and I living together,
Yeah. And you are born in New York?
I was born in Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how old was you when you went to Pittsburgh?
I was 7.
7. And you spent, how many years you spent in Pittsburgh?
My mother and I, we moved in 1975, and I lived there until 1993.
Yeah.
So I was there for about 17 years.
Is that in the place, the apartment you call the cave?
The cave, that's right.
The cave.
That's right. We lived in, and this is a big part of the book, is that the deprivation that my mother and I lived through was in many ways self-inflicted. When we moved to Pittsburgh, we essentially moved into a ghetto and lived in a pretty horrific apartment. And it was years later that I was able to putting things back together, that my mother was college educated. She had a degree from the University of Minnesota in English literature. She worked her entire life pretty much as a secretary and never really aspired for anything higher than that to make more money. I have a wealthy uncle. I don't know, Mark Harris, who wrote Bang the Drum Slowly, the author. And he lived in Pittsburgh. And so
I looked that up, they made a movie after,
of course, right.
with Robert De Niro.
That's right.
So
that's right.
What you are saying is that your background of your mother, they are all middle class.
That's right.
Would I say bourgeois?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Middle class, bourgeois. They wouldn't say they're bourgeois.
No,
They'd
of
kill
course
you for
not.
saying.
No.
But that's an interesting thing about the Socialist Workers Party is that it is. It's mainly middle class. They profess to be of the working class. We're the vanguard party. We're going to lead the working class. They take jobs in coal mines and steel mills and garment factories and pretty miserable jobs. but these are jobs that they've chosen to take. It's sort of them becoming authentic workers. And my mother, in many ways, was doing the same. Here we are living in poverty, but there was really, I mean, we were not without resources. Other poor families are without resources. We were not. She just chose not to utilize those resources.
Yeah. Do you think that they glorifying at that time their poverty, or was it just a matter that they were poor? They chose to be poor, but they are not.
I think it's seen as noble. It's under capitalism, if you are a success in capitalism, it's because you have somehow been co-opted by the system, or you have exploited people along the way. I write in the book, it's sort of a version of the Sermon on the Mount. It's that the poor are the ones, the workers are the ones who are going to eventually inherit the world. And so I do think there's this psychological thing of it's ennobling to be this way. And I have to say, when I moved to Pittsburgh and I called this apartment the cave, which should have been a troubling indicator for my mother, that this is how you described our domicile. She would have me tell the comrades the funny term that I used to describe the apartment. So that's just to give you
They didn't bother at all calling that a cave.
No, it was yeah. Look how deserving we are. Look at our struggle. We're struggling under capitalism.
Yeah. Tell me something more about, because you, as I said in my introduction, you have a very sharp eye for description of the people around you. One of the things you said, they were all middle class, almost.
Right.
But there was something about the way the knapsack, how do you call it?
Oh, sure. The knapsack.
The knapsack. Would you please tell me something about this unifying knapsack they had all? Because we have that in Holland too.
You have knapsacks.
Yes. And the Socialist Party.
What's that?
But it's first you.
Well, I just, I described my mother carrying this knapsack everywhere we went. She never had a purse, but she had a knapsack. And in the knapsack we had all the things you need for the revolution. We had the militants to sell. We had the leaflets. We had the stapler, so you can put the leaflets up on there. She had a box of staplers in case you run out of staplers. She had tape. And some years later, I ran into some socialist workers. We call each other comrades, by the way. Really, that's what they say. Comrades. I saw some comrades at a demonstration, and I remember that the woman had a knapsack, and I was struck by how that it was sort of like a ubiquitous accoutrement for Socialist Workers Party members to have this. Although, my mother read the memoir, and she said, I've decided I'm not going to carry a knapsack anymore. It was like the one thing, writing can make a difference in the world.
By the way, talking about that, because the reviews were very positive about your book. Congratulations with that. But I wonder how your book was landed among the social party members.
Oh, socialist workers, yeah.
Yeah. How did they?
My mother left the Socialist Workers Party about 25 years ago. So she has distance on the experience. My father is still a member. And when I was about 18, he had gone to Iran and he came back. We'll probably get into that.
Talk about that.
But we developed a relationship. And but I wrote a piece that ended up becoming the book. It was published in Grantham Magazine in 2005. My father hasn't spoken to me since. And I can say, I think with confidence, that he will never speak to me again, because what I've done in writing this book is sacrilege. And I knew that and I kind of knew the risk taking, that you don't talk about the politics, you don't criticize the Socialist Workers Party. So I have not heard from my father, but I've heard from members of the Socialist Workers Party who have said, "How dare you say these things?" And I happen to know your father was a great man. One that always sticks in my head was a woman who said, "Your father was I happen to know he was a great father and that he didn't abandon you." She sent this in an email, and and it was stunning because I was thinking, maybe I need to rethink my child. And then I realized that she didn't know who I was. She was confusing me with my brother, which essentially proved my point that she didn't even know I had existed.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
So,
yeah.
so the Socialist Workers Party does not take kindly. I'm sure my father would say that it's an attack on the working class and that I'm fascist or I'm right wing or some variation of that, and he would dismiss it.
At least imperialist.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
At least, yeah.
yeah.
But and let me just get the fact fixed. So, 40 years old, your father abandoned you when you were 9 months old, and he started a relationship, as you call it, with another female comrade.
Right. That's
Yes,
right. That's right. Yeah.
And how often did you see him till you were 18 or?
I have very few memories of him. When my mother and I were living in Brooklyn, we were all sort of in the same vicinity. So I have, half a dozen memories of him. Once we moved to Pittsburgh, I don't think I ever saw him. That was when I was 7. And then in 1979, the drama begins with the Iranian Revolution, and my father moved back to Iran.
Yeah.
And then I didn't see him until I was 17.
Yeah, and he went back to Iran to start
The Socialist Workers Party of Iran,
Yeah.
right? The first Trotskyist party on Iranian soil,
Sure,
the Socialist Workers Party of Iran.
Yeah, and
I'm sure you've all heard of that.
at that time I was living in Iran, and I can very clearly remember the presidential elections in Iran. Yeah, I guess it was in 1980. Am I right?
1980,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. And I just found out reading your book that your father, he was a presidential candidate in
Right.
Iran.
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
Very excited.
And and you were very excited about that too, because you told that in your
class.
way in the class. Would you
Right,
please
right.
describe
Yeah.
the scene?
The one step we're missing in the chain is that the hostage crisis had begun.
Oh,
so my
yeah,
father
very
moves
small
back. If we can
stage,
follow the chronologies, that my father moves back in January 1979. Basically after the Shah had just fled, but about 2 weeks before Khomeini arrived back in Iran from his exile. In November 1979, the hostages were taken in Iran, American hostages, and what began for me, I was 10 years old and I was in 6th grade, was I began to have an awareness that I was Iranian. And I think it was the first time that I began to be aware of this. Because, after all, I'm my mother's son, and she's Jewish, and all I have connected to my father is this crazy name. But I started to become aware, I'm Iranian. And the problem is that November 1979, when the hostages are taken, is not the time to become aware that you're Iranian in the United States. And it began to begin my sense of alienation that I don't think has ever ended. Although it's a nice turnout, so thank you for coming. But it's, so in 1980, it would be January 1980, the presidential election had happened, and I had received a leaflet from him, and written in Persian, but announcing his candidacy. And we had, and God only knows why I did this, but we had in history class current events. And what did I bring in for current events? Actually, I'm not doing myself justice. I said I don't know why I did it. I know why I did it, because I knew my father is running for president, and that is something you are supposed to be excited about and proud about. And I was embarrassed about it. Partly because I didn't know my dad really, and then suddenly I have this thing. I'm supposed to be excited for him, and so I take it to class, and there's a moment in the book where the teacher. I don't tell anybody that's my father. I just say, I have a flyer that says about someone running for president of Iran. And then the teacher says, okay, Saïd, why don't you can you tell us about the language that the flyer is written in? And of course, I can't tell you anything about the language the flyer is written in. And he says, can you tell us something about the history of Iran? No, the point is here's the point. I want to show the flyer, and then I want you to say, who's the person in the flyer? And then I say very deadpan, that's my father. Yeah. And then everybody gets excited, and then I'm a star, and we're all, and it didn't turn out that way. And so, yeah.
Okay, I guess we just see we about 3 or 4 meetings with your dad in this book, but in a way it's all about your dad.
That's right. Right.
And of course with your mother, I really sympathize with her, but with your dad, would you please tell me, how did you call your dad? Because there is some.
How do I actually address him?
Yeah. How do you address him?
Yeah.
Yes.
I talk about, and I think he sent me a letter, also right around the time of him running for president, and I've saved the letter, and it was a very short letter where he said, "I want to congratulate you on selling the most number of militants at the such and such demonstration," and I had not sold the most number of militants. I've never sold a militant in my life. I was 10 years old. I was too young to sell militants. And I remember feeling embarrassed that I wasn't the guy. I'm not the person. He was like, the congratulations was to the wrong person. But I remember that he ended, he said, it was a very cheerful, upbeat letter. He ended, "Love M." M, and it was like squiggly line going M, because his name's Mahmoud. And because that's not how, that's not how you would sign a letter to your son, M, right?
And then right. you were thinking, how
right? So if I'm going to respond, then how do I address the letter? And I had no idea to whom I should address the letter. All the many possibilities seemed to mock me. Dear Dad, dear Daddy, Pa, Papa, Poppy, Pop. The salutation revealed the facade. Dear Mahmoud Sayrafiezadeh.
Yeah. Okay.
And I never wrote the letter.
Yeah. But eventually, I read in other parts, you had that problem of addressing people with other people too, with a teacher, and you find a way to address people.
Right. That was the other thing that I would. There's a moment when I'm very young and I'm with my father, and I'm having dinner with him, and it was the same thing. I didn't know how to address him, and I kept waiting to make eye contact, and what I did was, I did what I had done in nursery school, was I had a Filipino teacher, and I couldn't ever pronounce her name, and I would say, "Hey, guess what? Hey, guess what?" And then the other comes, "That's not her name is not Hey, guess what?" And so with my father at age 6 or something, at dinner with a group with my brother and sister, I said, "Hey, guess what?" And yeah. Okay. So he's either Mahmoud Sayrafiezadeh or Hey, guess what?
Yeah. And coming back to your own name, you I guess your brother and sister, they changed their names, yeah? Right. To what?
Well, my sister's taken her married name. So she often goes by, well, her name is Jamila.
Jamila.
You say Jamila?
Yeah.
Oh, we say Jamila.
Jamila.
You say Jamila.
I say potato.
You and my dad could have like a discussion about the proper pronunciation.
Okay.
I feel like I should defer to you because but
yes, my son. Okay.
And so she.
Why she was called? Because there is a reason for calling you these names. Tell me something about the background.
The actual choosing of the names.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, my brother is
all politics.
Yeah, my brother is named Jacob, and my father said this to me once. He said, your name signifies the epiphany of my political something or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And what he meant by that was that my brother, his firstborn, is named Jacob, who was named after, I'm not sure, it's someone on my mother's side. She has a number of Jacobs. My sister was named after Jamila Bouhired, who was an Algerian guerrilla. And then comes to me, Saïd, and I'm named after my great uncle who fought in the first Iranian revolution in 1907, the constitutional revolution. And he was killed in that revolution. And so my father named me Saïd. And one of the ironies of the book that I love pointing out, any chance I get, is that everybody's changed their name, that my brother has shortened his last name to Sayraf. My sister has, so sometimes he's Jake Sayraf. He goes by Jake Sayraf. My sister has her married name and sometimes goes by Jamie. So she's Jamie Dyer. And then here I am, the guy who didn't grow up with the father. And I'm Saïd Sayrafiezadeh. And there's only 2 Sayrafiezadehs in the United States. And it's me and my dad.
Okay, because as a matter of fact, I went today to the White Pages, the website, and I looked your name up. In the whole United States, there's only one. That's you.
That's me. Because my dad's not listed, because he's probably concerned
listed.
about the
FBI
or I don't know. But
at least FBI. At least FBI.
He can only hope. I mean, that was,
But
yes.
there was a chance that you had another name. Am I right or not?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. It's funny you're saying. I'm like, what's the other? You're right. Of course. I'm right.
I read it in this book.
You read?
Yeah.
Not just the cliff notes. You actually read.
I read the book.
Yeah, my mother told me that before I was born, they considered naming me Che.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm glad that got a response, so I don't have to tell you. And her.
But what happened? Because there was a reason they didn't give you.
Well, yeah, her reason was what she told me was we thought that a name like Che Sayrafiezadeh would present too many obstacles for you in life, which I bought hook, line, and sinker until I don't know. Years later, I went. But Saïd Sayrafiezadeh isn't all that much better. And actually, come to think of it, Che would have been better than. So.
Yeah. I might correct me if I'm wrong, because it's your book, And am I right if I say that your book is about? I don't know what it is about, or it's for a great deal about constructing identity. Is maybe plural. Singular. Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
Yeah?
I have no idea. No,
because there was a time...
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's under one of the layers. I mean, you're talking about layers. I mean, I think, sure, it's about my identity and, where did I get my identity from and how it was sort of thrust upon me, all of these things. And I had really no choice, no say in the matter. And then as an adult, trying to... I don't know, reinvent myself or strip things away, which I think probably is a lifelong process.
Yeah.
But, little by little, and you probably don't get rid of everything. And I think absolutely, sure.
And talking about identity, because there was a time that you chose not to say that you were half Iranian, but you were half Persian.
Half Persian.
Persian,
right.
yeah.
It's the other country.
And nobody knows, even you don't know.
It finally dawned on me during the Iran hostage crisis to stop telling people when they asked me where I was from, which is bizarre anyway, because I'm not from Iran. I mean, someone says, where are you from? I'm from Iran. But I would say, I'm Persian. I'm from Persia.
Yeah, this is here, I guess. Yeah, am I right?
That's right.
You'd
make a great lawyer. I had devised the clever strategy of telling anyone who inquired that I was Persian. No one, including me, knew exactly where or what Persia was, but everyone seemed satisfied with the answer.
and because, I visited the United States a couple of times, and especially in and around LA, there are big Iranian community, and they are all from Persia. They're all Persians.
That's what they say.
Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah,
okay.
And how do you see that?
Well, you probably could speak to this better than I can, but I mean, they're trying to identify with a former version of Iran, which I guess was in the 1940s is when the name changed from Persia to Iran by Shah Pahlavi, who was who preceded Reza, the final Shah. So they must to a more nostalgic
For you, it was just an escape.
It was a way to hide myself, right?
And-
It was absolutely.
And now, if people ask you the very simple question,
Oh,
where are
yeah.
you from?
That's great. That's a good.
What do you say?
Your question about the question is great. God, what do I say? I think I say, I don't say I'm from Iran anymore. If anything, I'll say I'm half Iranian, I'm half Jewish.
But these are
You know what
two
happens?
identities.
Can I say, in New York City, people don't ask me that a lot because everybody is from everywhere, and you're in America. I don't know. I'm in America.
And
But
you are famous in New York City.
I'm what?
You are famous. in
Famous?
New York. Yeah, so
Oh,
people
that's
don't
nice.
ask. Yeah, I read the reviews. You are famous. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so then
So,
they don't need
but
to ask.
other parts of New York. Where are you from,
You know,
sir?
when I grew up in Pittsburgh, that's when I had. That's where it was really, where are you from? And I was always struggling because then I would want to say, well, I'm actually from New York because that's where I was born. And they go, yeah, but where are you really from?
Yeah.
And what they want me to say is that I'm from Iran, and that ends it. And I think I did that for many, many years until it occurred to me that I'm not from Iran. And actually saying I'm from Iran is a way also to not disclose that I'm half Jewish, which makes the whole thing somewhat more complicated. And you were worried about using that word problematic, saying, but I think it's true. It just it makes it more complex, and I don't know, and in some ways embarrassing, because it's strange for a lot of people that someone's actually Iranian and they're Jewish, and whoa, what's that about? And you know, and then I have to say, well, my parents split up. And, you know, no, yeah, of course they would have, you know, which isn't really why they, you know, it wasn't for ethnic, but. So.
Okay, but this matter of names and naming, and because you said your mother, Martha, Martha Finkelstein.
Finkelstein, yeah.
Yeah, Finkelstein. They changed their name to Harris.
that's
Why
right.
to Harris? Do you have any idea?
I know why. Well, it was because my uncle Mark Harris. He was Mark Harris Finkelstein, and so he decided he was trying to become a writer, and he thought he would have an easier time if he wasn't so identifiably Jewish.
And there was a time that you supposed to meet your father at the airport.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes, the
It's
name.
all about names.
The
yeah,
very
it's
first
about-
time I met my father when I was 17, when he came back from Iran, 1986. And he wasn't at the gate to meet me. And I wandered the airport, and then I heard coming over the loudspeaker, Saïd Harris, please meet your party at blah, blah. And Saïd Harris, I'd never in my life been Saïd Harris. It enrages me now just to even remember this, because I had hung on to that name throughout the entire hostage crisis. And then here I am, the man who, I don't know, I did it for. Yeah, I did it for him. For our to maintain this connection is now saying Saïd Harris. And I think also that it sort of exemplifies the distance that he puts up, you know, that I'm Mahmoud Sayrafiezadeh and you're a Harris.
Yeah. How do you relate to your father in that way? How do you see him? Can you put him? Are you angry? Are you disappointed? Please tell me. What
Go
is-
on, more adjectives,
No,
because
no.
everything you say will be that thing.
If I ask you just to use one adjective.
Oh wow, that's tough. Let me just say it this way. We don't have a relationship, and as I said in the beginning, we probably will never have one. And it's hurtful, but in many, many ways, it's okay with me. And the sacrifice of the relationship is worth it for me. To have been able to tell this story, I needed to say these things. And if it means that we never speak again, then that's what I had to do. That's what I had to go through. So that's not to say that I'm not angry. And I think it comes up, you know, it comes and goes, anger, sadness, regret. My father's a very charming man. You would all, if he was here now, you'd all love him. And I could leave right now, he'd get on stage and you'd all forget what I said and you'd love him. And it's wonderful to be with him for that one dinner every 6 months. But to try to have a relationship, It's impossible. And really, the relationship I needed is not now. I needed the relationship when I was a child. That's the relationship that we lost. So yeah, I mean, I think the risk has been. I'm happy about the results of this.
And do you think because he sounds a very selfish guy. Am I right?
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
selfish, maybe narcissistic. Narcissistic guy. How do you see those qualifications in relationship with his work in the Socialist Party?
Yeah. You keep saying Socialist Party.
Oh, how do you
No, that's fine. No, and it's fine because that's the thing.
Workers' Party.
And I wish it had been the Socialist Party because then everybody would know. But it's the Socialist
Workers' Party.
Yeah, and some people say, "Oh, the Communist Party." It goes, "No, I kind of wish it had been those because then it's people know those. You go, "Yeah, Communist Party, yeah." The McCarthy, there's something, but it's the Socialist Workers.
What's the difference between
Oh
socialists?
God, we don't have to.
Okay.
No, I mean you'd all be asleep. I mean, no one cares really the Socialist Workers
Maybe we
Party.
should try that.
Okay.
Just try us.
Socialist Workers Party followed Trotsky.
Okay.
Not Stalin, never Stalin, to their credit. So, I guess that's where the difference begins and ends, really. Yeah. And so they actually abhor each other. I think the Socialist Workers Party hates the Communist Party almost as much as they hate capitalists, maybe even more. I'm not sure.
You were right. I regret my question. We skip that. So now
we were
talking
saying about
those qualifications,
the narcissistic selfishness.
How that relates
because when he's in the Socialist Workers Party, I bought this for many years. Look at look at what I'm doing this is the childhood. This was your father, and not so many words, but the message was clear. Your father is not here with you because he's off trying to make the world a better place. He's sacrificing for the world. That's when you're going to have your skateboard, when your dad brings home the revolution. So I think I believed it for so long that, yeah, he's this selfless man, and then realized, yeah, he's narcissistic and he's a megalomaniac, and it's really about reflected glory and the spotlight.
There was a time that you were wishing that, because he was captured in Iran for
Right, he was
2 months.
Right, he went to prison after the presidential election. He was arrested 2 years later, 1982, and he went to prison for 66 days.
Yes, 66 days, because they had this newspaper or magazine.
Well, yeah, he had this. Yeah. This is vintage social. It doesn't matter what country it's in. They began as a Socialist Workers Party.
Yeah.
Then they became the Revolutionary Workers. Then it was then they split. We're talking about within 2 years. They became the Revolution. So there's the Socialist Workers Party, the Revolutionary Workers Party, and then it became the Workers' Unity Party. Yeah. So within 2 years, suddenly there's all these things. Yeah. So yeah, he was with the Workers' Unity Party, and he had a newspaper, and they said, "Don't publish." The authority said, "Stop publishing your newspaper," and he stopped. Yeah. And then one day he decided to go to the authorities and say, "Is it okay to restart?" Yeah. And the answer was, "No, it's not okay, and also now you come with us for even asking the question."
Yeah. So they put him in jail, and somewhat your mother got the message that he was in the prison. Yeah. And am I right that you're telling somewhere in your book that you wished he was dead?
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't believe, in talking about my dad going through that, I can't believe I'm laughing about it. Yeah. Because it was horrific. It was horrifying when I was a child. But yeah, I mean, I thought, I don't know my dad, and in some ways, this is the great ending to the story. This is what's going to make his legend, because this is what happens to great revolutionaries, and I thought he was a great revolutionary. Che Guevara was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. If you are worth your salt, you will be executed. Yeah, right, Trotsky, sure. So I think there was the fantasy of that, and also finally ridding him from my life. And all this I feel like as I'm saying it sounds terribly harsh, but I think within the context of my childhood, and as you said, that it's so much about, the book is really in some ways about my father. It's like this absence really hung over my childhood, and this would be the way that we could go out in sort of a blaze of glory. Yeah.
And if I ask you, you wished him dead, Was it because of you hated him, because he has abandoned you, or because it was the biggest story you could tell everybody else?
I think unconsciously maybe because I hated him, but I think consciously it's here's the story. When people would say like, "Where's your dad?" That's a tough question to always have to be answering. One of the ranks up there with where are you from, and so I think it would be now I can tell you. It's funny. I remember this when I was a child. I was at a sleepover camp. I must have been 7, and somehow we got onto fathers, and I made up this story about how my father was a firefighter and was killed fighting a fire. And I love that story. And I think there's the genesis of what would happen when he's in prison. And I think this is the way I want to be able to talk about my father. And also, and this is why he's not here. He would be here if he could be here, but he was executed in Iran, so that's why he's not a part of my life. So I think it would have all tied it up very nicely.
Zijn er vragen? Zijn er questions? Okay. Yes, please stand up. Please stand up and ask a question.
You talk a lot about your father, but what was your relationship with your mother and your relationship to your father? What would she tell you?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I talk a lot about my mother in the book because it's all me and my mom. My mom never stopped loving my dad. She never remarried. In fact, she remained married to my dad so that he could stay in the country, in the United States. She never dated, had very little personal life, almost no personal life. The life was the party. And she never badmouthed my father. She extolled him, worshipped him, and I took on that worship. I think that was a real message of the childhood, was that this man is an untouchable.
Other questions, please? Would you please? We can, if you go over there in the microphone. Yes. Okay. Die kant op daar.
Okay.
Do your brother and sister share your views on the life of your father, and how did the family come together after a certain age? Did you see your sister and brother?
Yeah, well, the second, the last part first. I do see my brother and sister now. We're all over. I'm in New York. My brother's in Michigan. My sister's in Florida. But when I turned 18, we sort of began to have a relationship because I saw them very seldom when I was a child. I don't want to speak for them about their views about my dad. They also grew up with him, so it's different. But he abandoned them as well. He went back to Iran. My sister was 15 years old, so he left her. My brother was 18. Pretty much everybody has been abandoned by the parent in this family. So I think it's similar. I think they were also in the Socialist Workers Party. They are no longer in the Socialist Workers Party. They resigned. So I think it's similar in many ways. Although they do have a relationship with my father today, whereas I don't.
You think they read your book?
Oh yeah, I sent them copies of my book. Yeah.
And have you received anything?
Yeah, no, they love the book. They all love the book. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
It all has their endorsement. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nog een paar vragen. Ja.
Your story is a very compelling one, but where does it leave you now that you've told it in terms of your career as a writer?
There's that but. I was like, what's the but? Where does it lead me now? Well, there's more things. More things. I'm a narcissist too. There's more things I could talk about myself. It kind of, it's opened up a lot of opportunities for me. It's made people notice me in my writing. I think I've certainly have, I don't think I've said the last word on these things. I think they're very, I've written more things about being Iranian after this book came out. There's still more to talk about. But I did get a lot out of my system. So I don't know. We'll have to see what happens, what the future holds. Yeah. Have I been to Iran? No, I have never been. And very quickly, because this is ironic, I can't go to Iran because Iran will only allow me into the country if I have an Iranian passport because they consider me a citizen because of my father. I can only get an Iranian passport if I have an Iranian birth certificate. I can only get an Iranian birth certificate if my father applies for an Iranian birth certificate for me, and my father doesn't talk to me. So it's occurred to me that the very reason I want to go to Iran, the very person who, it's like, I can't go because of you and blah, blah, blah. So no, I haven't been. Maybe something will change, but yeah.
Mr. Please. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. There's some interesting parallels, actually, between my father and my relationship with him, so I'm going to buy your book. I have two questions. One is a follow-on to this lady's question about your brother and sister and their relationship with your father. Do you have any sense that when they were growing up and your father was with them, that he tended to them a lot, thought of their needs, and was really a good father? Or was he sort of absent in spirit, but there in person? And
The latter.
The latter. All right.
Yeah.
Do you think that had any effect on them? Now you know them more. Did it damage them in any sense here? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think my father tended to them.
Yeah.
My mother was and is depressed. She suffers from depression. And my father is the antithesis. He's this charming, fun-loving guy, and I've often rued the fact that I wasn't raised by him. But my mother was far more attentive in my life, and I think as an adult looking back, it was better after all to have been raised by her, who, and she also had aspirations to be an artist. That's where a lot of my writing comes from, and I saw her yearning for that, and she left the Socialist Workers Party.
And
so
she encouraged you to write and stuff?
She did, yeah.
Yeah.
She encouraged me to write. She encouraged me to be involved in theater and all sorts of things. So Little League baseball. So my brother and sister didn't have that with my dad. He was absent. And I'm sure it's affected them. I'm sure it's affected them as an adult. How could it not? Yeah.
Do either of them suffer from depression?
No, neither
good,
one.
good.
Yeah.
Second question has to do a little bit more with the ethics of your father. Do you think, and this is a little bit delicate, some people who are narcissistic and very successful can strive to do everything so that they get recognition and do well in their things, but in other aspects of their life, they're dealing with other certain situations. They could be kind of unethical. And not care about related causes and things. Did you see any of that in your father?
Your questions are great, but I feel like you answered that. Yeah, I absolutely. The hypocrisy. That's a big part of the book is the hypocrisy of, you say ethics.
Yeah.
Ethics, morals, hypocrisy. Yeah,
yeah.
that they, in the Socialist Workers Party, the justice, talking about justice for everyone, and then here's this family that's fallen apart, and the parents neglect the children. And there's abuse and all sorts of things. So, yeah, I yes to the second. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nou, nog 2 vragen, dan gaan we naar het einde toe. Just 2 more questions and then we go. Yeah, please. Over there.
Hi, thanks. Really enjoyed reading the book. In the book, you described that day on campus when your mom and dad were walking with your brother and sister. The day that changed your entire family,
Right.
That the comrades were there and shared the information with them. Have you gone through in your mind what your family would be like if they hadn't run into the comrades? And if you could maybe give us a blip of what you think life would have been like.
That's a great question. Just for those of you who haven't read it, my mother and father met at the University of Minnesota and in 1958, which also happened to be the hotbed of the Socialist Workers Party at the time. And so I describe a scene that occurred in 1964 where my mother and father were walking along the campus with my brother and sister, and there just so happened to be this table set up with this thing called the Militant. And my mother and father stopped for a moment and bought a copy for 10 cents in 1964, and then set in motion what would happen. And I have thought about that, and I think they were already the people they were. I think if it hadn't been the Socialist Workers Party, it would have been something else. And I think they were looking for a family, they were looking for an organization, something to help make sense of the chaos of their lives, they had their own difficult childhoods. So I can't blame it entirely on the Socialist Workers Party that here are my parents and they brainwashed them. My parents were those people who wanted that. So maybe it would have been something else. Yeah. It is a good question. It is a...
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I was thinking about this with my wife, my now wife, but then my girlfriend. We had just begun dating, and she said to me, "Do you consider yourself a communist?" This is about 10 years ago. And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then, and then she started to ask me, "Well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be communist?" And I was very conscious that I couldn't answer her questions honestly. And she was just asking. She was very genuine. There was no judgment. And she said to me, "Well, will I be able to, if after the communist revolution, be able to buy beauty products? Will they be available?" And I said, "Oh yeah, no, they're everything you want. It's all good." Because for me, my idea of the revolution is not Soviet Russia. It's bounty. That's my fantasy. It's skateboards for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I said to her, and I wasn't able to answer her questions, and I remember thinking aloud, I said, "Wow, it doesn't sound like I know what I'm talking about." And in my mind, that was her cue to say, "No, you know a lot about this. You know a lot. You're teaching me a lot." And she said, "Yeah, it sounds like you don't." And I'm not kidding you. In that moment, I realized I had swallowed something hook, line, and sinker, and I had never questioned it. And whether or not it made sense or not, and communism is the right way and the Socialist Workers Party have the truth, that was beside the point. The point was that I had taken something on, and I didn't know what it was about. I had just accepted it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How old are you?
I was 31, about 30 or 31. God, that sounds old now. Jeez, that's way too old.
Marty, can we, when we are finished, can we hang around here still for a drink? Yeah? Yeah, okay, yeah. Because I'm sure that a lot of people would like to ask you something, and in person, as you see, they ask whether you were married, and how old are you, your children, and that's the Dutch audience, They love writers. What's your plans for let's say, for the next 2-3 years?
Oh God, don't ask me.
No, please tell me.
To write the next book.
Yeah,
to write the next 2 books. I don't know. Yeah.
No. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sure.
What?
About what?
Yeah.
I'm still thinking of ideas for that. There are things in the book that I notice that I write very quickly. Oh, this happened, and then I move on. And then it's occurred to me now that they could possibly be its own book in itself. One idea that I've had is my mother took me when I was 9 years old to see a prisoner serving a life sentence for having killed a police officer. This is in Pittsburgh. Now, why she took me at 9 to meet this man, I don't know. But the Socialist Workers Party was very active in his case, saying that he had been framed, et cetera. And it's occurred to me to contact him now, 31 years later, and he's still in prison, and that there could be some sort of story in and of, in that. So
I see, yeah, okay.
I hope that didn't sound too depressing.
The very last question.
One more question. I just wonder if you've gone through all this communist indoctrination, would there be in your life any room for a critique of capitalist society?
Could you please repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. The question is, after all of this communist indoctrination, would there at some point now going forward, a critique in my life of capitalism. Is that fair? Yeah. That's a great question, because that's the problem, is that whenever I do feel like critiquing capitalism, especially with the recent economic downturn, I can't tell if that's how I really think and feel, or is that because that's what the Socialist Workers Party would say I should be thinking. So I think the short answer is yes, there's definitely a critique of capitalism somewhere in my future, but maybe the more interesting thing is how would I ever parse, or how would I ever be able to have my independent, stand on my own 2 feet and say, this is really what I think, I accept, and take responsibility for it, or is that just something that's, because I read the newspaper today, and I'm not exaggerating, I can't read, it's very difficult for me to read anything without thinking, oh, what would my dad say about that? I don't know how to respond to that, what would my dad say? And then I have to get past that hurdle and then think, well, what would I say? What would I think? What's my reaction? So,
How about the other way around? Is there any love toward leftish ideas?
yes, there's love.
Yeah.
Yeah, love. Okay, love. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I consider myself, I suppose, leftist still, or I have leftist ideas. Again, though, it's hard to know. Is that just because there's a period of sort of questioning everything and saying maybe capitalism is the best economy, and maybe everything the United States done is actually great, because the Socialist Workers Party said everything the United States has done is bad. So you flip it around, and a lot of it. The problem is a lot of it just becomes oppositional. You sort of I find my identity through opposition. What does the New York Times say, and then I'll say the opposite, and that way I can have my own independent voice. But really, that independent voice is the Socialist Workers Party voice. So you can see I'm caught between all of these vies. So I need a drink now too. Yeah.
Now you, as you probably notice, I'm really a big fan of the book. So I hope that you will all tomorrow, or maybe within 5 minutes, run to the girl sitting outside and buy the book in Dutch or in English. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for being here and have this honest, open conversation with me and with the audience. And the next, Maarten, what is the next event here? Or do you want? Okay, we'll wrap up. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bahram.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Saïd Sayrafiezadeh, for coming. Thank you, Bahram.
Thank you.
Our next events will be on October 16th. We'll have Christopher Caldwell in the OBA, the library. And on October 20th in the Muziekgebouw aan het IJ, we'll have Marvin Hamlish. And Saïd will be signing books outside, so have a drink and stick around.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Maarten.
you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.